Thank you. Well, I spent a year in Darwin, but I didn't get the Darwin accent, not yet. So good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Christina for the opportunity. I had the most delightful 2 days with you, sharing and learning from you, and I'm sure to go back home with my notebook full of ideas that my colleague and I will test by next week, okay? So I have nothing to disclose. I am not talking on behalf of WHO. All the views are my own. Second warning is, I don't know if you have noticed or if by Steve's description, I am a non-native English speaker. So do not be surprised if in the middle of the talk, you catch yourselves listening to Portuguese, okay? So that's why I have my iPad here. I'm testing an innovation to run through my notes in case of my English fails me. So I would like to invite you to embark on a journey with me through space and time. I have a very good airplane that can fly in this bad weather, which, by the way, I know Vancouver doesn't often get snowstorms like this, and this was specially made for this talk, for us to enter in the mood of climate change. So let's embark on this journey through space and time and examine what disasters can teach us about resilience. Are usually a blockbuster. If their prediction is right, the world will be wrecked by disaster. Human beings will show their darker side, creating chaos and panic that only a handsome hero could prevent. I wouldn't mind being saved by Jared Butler, but I dare challenge this prediction. We do not need a handsome hero. We need strong preparedness, recovery, and response plans. We need resilience. So, in my biography, we forgot to mention that I am also an improvement advisor. And as many of us improvement advisors, we can have a nerdy side, a geek side, and we love operational definitions. So bear with me just a minute. I have just a couple of important operational definitions for us. And I promise only 4 charts doing the entire presentation, okay? So it's very scientific now. Disasters. The word disaster comes from Latin, and it means without a planet or without a star. The sense is astrological, yes, astrology, of calamity based on the ill position of a planet or a star. A more down-to-earth definition comes from the IFRC, which is the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, when they say that disaster is an event that significantly disrupts the functioning of a community or a society and can cause severe human, material, environmental, and economic losses, and sometimes overwhelm the community resources. And the scope of this talk will be sudden onset disasters. Those disasters that happen with little or no warning, unlike the snowstorm outside, but earthquakes, tsunamis, and typhoons, and that can significantly pose a challenge to the health system. The clock's not running, so I don't know if I need to start the clock. I don't want to track time, lose track of time. I know you have a flight to catch. I don't want to hold you more than you should. And so disasters are all around us. They happen everywhere, all the time. All countries are vulnerable to disasters, regardless its economic development or risk reduction efforts. While most incidents are national incidents that can be dealt with by local resources, a few are of such catastrophic magnitude that need international attention. Over the past 10 years, believe it or not, the absolute number of disasters has remained stable. However, the impact in terms of numbers of lives and damage in billions of dollars has increased considerably. Climate change, conflict, and rapid urbanization are some of the key factors driving the worsening of the impact. And if I'm not mistaken, here in British Columbia, you had the worst forest fire season in 2017. And if I got it right, about 65,000 people have to flee their homes. So it's really all around us. Now just another, indulging my improvement advisor side, what do we mean when we talk about resilience? Resilience has become a buzzword in healthcare, but what does it actually mean? Resilience means the ability of a system to absorb, adapt, and respond to an impact with the provision of needed services. In other words, it's the ability to bounce back and continue business as usual. A health system is said to be resilient when it protects lives and provides good outcomes to all during a crisis and in the aftermath of a crisis. But when we talk about resilience, we need also to consider another important aspect that is called everyday resilience. Everyday resilience doesn't deal with the abrupt external shock that we think of when we talk about systems resilience. Everyday resilience has to do with those daily chronic stresses that are infused in the organization life. For example, unpredictable staff, changing patients and community expectations, resource provision delays, or my favorite, imposed, sometimes senseless policies. All these stresses can undermine the health workers, the managers, the frontline staff, and impact care delivery. And we need everyday resilience to cope with them. So, all our operational definitions are in place. We are ready to embark on our journey. So let's fly all the way to a better weather, to the south, to Chile. That's a country that is constantly being shaken by earthquakes. Earthquakes are so frequent in Chile that they have a national drink that is actually called earthquake. Chile is a high-income country with about 18 million people, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in Latin America, and it has a very high Human Development Index. The Human Development Index was developed to emphasize that people and their capabilities are more important to assess the development of a country than economic growth. And Chile has a very high Human Development Index. On September 2015, at 6:54 p.m., an 8.4 magnitude earthquake hit the cities of Choaca and Coquimbo. Within minutes after the quake, loud sirens rocked the affected areas and millions were evacuated within hours. That saved many lives. That is a lesson hardly learned from the 2010 earthquake, when 500 people lost their lives due to a delay in issuing a tsunami alert, which prevented people from a timely evacuation, causing the death of 500 people. Chile is the country that has one of the strongest infrastructures in terms of disaster response, and it's led by a general who lost his wife in the Haiti earthquake. And one of the key aspects of Chile's preparedness plan are the evacuation exercises, which are run for entire regions from 6 to 7 times a year. Chile has also a very strict building code. All buildings need to endure a 9.0 earthquake. They have a very strong search and rescue system and a very strong voluntary-based firefighting system. I really like this quote from Christophe, who's a friend, who says the difference between being in an earthquake and in a disaster is the level of preparation. Chile is a showcase in preparation, in level of preparation. That's why only a dozen people lost their lives in a very strong earthquake, while thousands or hundreds of thousands lost their lives in weaker events. And that quote sets the perfect stage to our next stop. Let's cross now from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from South America to Haiti, to the Caribbean. Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, It ranks in the lower bottom of the Human Development Index. It ranks 164 out of possible 195. Haiti is particularly vulnerable to disasters. Political instability, poverty, rapid urbanization, and concentration of the population in and around the capital are some of the factors that make Haiti particularly vulnerable. Haiti's disaster preparedness plans were only modest. They focused especially on the seasonal hurricanes, and no serious attention was given by the health system to the rare scenario of a severe earthquake until that hit. On January 12, 7 minutes shy from 5 p.m., a 7.0 magnitude earthquake hit Port-au-Prince, the capital city. It was the worst earthquake to hit Haiti in 200 years, and it could not have occurred in a more vulnerable area than the capital city, a densely populated area. The impact of the quake was devastating. 200,000 people lost their lives. Building collapsed, the presidential palace collapsed, health facilities collapsed. While the response, the impact was unprecedented, the response was unprecedented as well. Over 400 healthcare teams, ranging from the well-organized NGOs and government teams to the more improvised one. 400 teams responded to the earthquake in Haiti. Unfortunately, quality of care and coordination came short of what was possible to achieve. There were articles published criticizing the high number of amputations. Some articles talked about medical shame. Concerns were raised about the arrival of teams without invitation, without coordination, and the arrival of teams not prepared to deal with the burden of diseases. So this is one of the 4 charts that I have to show you. The typical burden of diseases after an earthquake can be divided into 4 waves. Wave 1 deals with the immediate effect of the trauma, with the head, the trauma, the chest, and the abdominal injuries. And it's unlikely to improve except from a very fast response, which is only achieved by national teams. Wave 2 deals with the complications of the impact. It will deal with wound complications and mostly with orthopedic cases. It's basically handled by surgical teams. Wave 3 will deal with indirect infectious diseases and the exacerbation of the non-communicable diseases. For example, patients on chronic medications that lose access to their primary care facilities and to their medications and therefore have an exacerbation of their chronic diseases. And wave 4 are just the normal needs of the health service that resurfaced after the impact. In Haiti, majority of teams came prepared to deal with wave 1, with the direct trauma complications, with the direct trauma after the impact. However, majority of them arrived around day 15. So they arrived when the more clinical waves were peaking. So capacity did not match demand. The needs of the population were not met. So the poor outcome of the response in Haiti created a burning platform. The humanitarian community realized that it could not have an ad hoc approach to response. And deployment is not about the skills of an individual, but about the safe and professional deployment of teams and their infrastructure. So Haiti happened in 2010, and in May 2015, after an extensive consultation process, the book that is originally called the Blue Book, very, very creative, was published and by WHO, and what it does, it lays out a classification framework, a typology, if you will, for the medical teams that deploy in the aftermath of a disaster. It also lays out guiding principles, core and technical standards that these teams need to comply with if response is to be safe, effective, efficient, person-centered, and timely. The guiding principles deal with topics such as professional ethics, accountability, and quality in its all 6 dimensions. The core and technical standards are very, very technical and have to do with staffing, with training, with clinical protocols, with pharmacy, and drug supplies. Initially when the book was written, we wrote as foreign medical teams, thinking about the teams that deploy from one country to the other. But after Nepal in 2015, we realized that national teams are important. They are actually the majority of the global health workforce. So the name was changed from foreign to emergency medical teams to highlight the importance of the national responders and that the standards apply to them as well with slightly modifications. There are 4 possible types of emergency medical teams. The first one it's an outpatient emergency care. It's your primary care clinics. Type 2 is a surgical care. Type 3 is more complex surgery and intensive care unit. And type 4 provides an additional specialized care. It's a cell that attaches to a local health facility or to a field hospital and provides specialty care like burns care, orthoplastic, and rehab. So after the classification was tested in the Philippines and proved fit for purpose, WHO launched in 2015 what we call a classification program for the medical teams, which is basically an external audit. It's a peer review process that has 2 phases, that has a mentorship phase, when teams that apply work with a mentor or a group of mentors to design and adapt its process so they meet the standards laid out by the Blue Book. And then you have a second phase, which is the verification phase, as we call it. It's when WHO and peers from the region do a site visit and a desktop review of documents. And teams that have successfully completed that process are awarded the title of classified teams and enter WHO's directory of classified EMTs. Up to date, we have 13 or 4 teams that have been classified. In the photo, you see Dr. Margaret Chan, former Director General of the World Health Organization, awarding the Costa Rican team their banner. They were the first team in the Americas to be classified. We have only 2 teams that have achieved classification in the Americas so far. One is Costa Rica, and another one is from Ecuador. And if my memory doesn't fail me, we have 1 team from Canada that have joined the initiative. It's the Canadian Medical Assistance Team, or CMAT. Okay? So let's travel now from the Americas all the way to Southeast Asia, to a country, to an archipelago country that's usually portrayed in travel magazines. In the last 3 travel magazines I bought in Brazil, we had the Philippines. The Philippines is a low-middle income country with about 100 million people, and it's a very disaster-prone nation. Every country that is disaster-prone, they're always waiting for the big one. I haven't met a single country that's, we are waiting for the big one, the big typhoon, the big earthquake, or whatever disaster they are more vulnerable to. In 7th of November 2013, the mother of all typhoons hit Tacloban in the Philippines. Haiyan, or Yolanda, as they like to call it locally, hit the Philippines with strong winds, killing about 7,000 people, harming other dozens of thousands, and destroying 33 million of coconut trees, which severely impacted the industry. The impact of the typhoon clearly overwhelmed the seemingly well-crafted disaster management plan of the Philippines government. And it provided a good reminder for us about the normal needs of a health system, that although they might be temporarily suspended, they are still there. In the 6 months following Yolanda, which is the big typhoon, there were 84,000 babies that were born. So when we are preparing our response plans, we need to think not only how to deal with the immediate effects of the typhoon or of the earthquake, but also how can we make sure that the normal needs of the health system are cared for. As a result, after an after-actions review, the government of the Philippines is developing, with help from WHO, a new plan. There were a series of workshops that have been conducted, assets mapping, gap analysis. They are now mapping their entire region and thinking how many teams, how many emergency medical teams, and what type of equipment, of people, and of supplies they need in case they are hit by a hurricane. And the following video will show just a glimpse of one of those trainings that have been recently conducted.
We really believe that national teams are in the best position to respond. What we'll see from this program is a strong national capacity to train their own teams. We train the trainers, and from then on they go back to their regions across the country and help create their own national teams that can be responding within their own province, their own region, or be offered between regions to a full national response. From that, we also expect the Philippines to create their own team to send to other countries, particularly across the Asia and Pacific region. We've seen this also roll out in places like Indonesia and Thailand, where there are over 70 teams. We've seen it happen in the South Americas and across Europe. So gradually, as this initiative strengthens, you will see more capacity at the national level, then offered to their regional neighbours, and from that, a safer global health emergency workforce and health security.
The last workshop was just conducted last week, and it was about coordination. Let's now continue in Southeast Asia, but go from sea level to the height of the Himalaya mountains. Let's land our plane, although the lack of oxygen, let's land it in Nepal. Nepal is a low-income country with about 30 million people. Its geography full of mountains, although it's a paradise for those who like mountain climbing, might make access difficult in the event of an emergency, like it happened in 2015, when a 7.8 magnitude, the worst quake to hit Nepal in 80 years, hit the country, bringing to ruins homes, historic temples, healthcare facilities, roads, and communications. About 8,000 to 9,000 people lost their lives, but what Nepal brought as a learning for us is the concept that coordination saves lives. The Nepali government took the lead in coordinating the trauma team. Within hours after the impact, there was a coordination meeting. The government established for the very first time in history what we called an emergency medical team coordinating cell. It is a cell that is responsible for tasking all the healthcare teams that respond. Contrary to what happened in the past, when the teams that deployed, for example, to Haiti had to find their own space, in Nepal, the teams were tasked where they were needed the most. So demand and capacity were matched, and that saved many lives. Another novelty that Nepal brought, and because of its complicated geography, was the concept of mobile teams. These are sort of outreach primary clinics that have a base of operation, and then they go to a village, to a rural area, provide care during the day, and then go back to its base of operation, refill, restock, and then go and provide care again. The next video I'm showing you is a glimpse of how it was in Nepal.
Board of district now to distribution of In a snapshot, you had 53 patients yesterday on the first day, literally as you built. You had 4 patients overnight. Your maternity ward's already open, your ER. You start surgery. That arrives today. You'll have it open ready tomorrow and X-ray.
We're in Chautara, up in Sindopolchok, which is one of the hardest hit areas. And what we're seeing is a really nice example of a foreign medical team working with a Nepali medical team, a national team. The Nepali team were working in the hospital just behind us, which is devastated. They moved to some tents and been treating patients from day 1, and now on a day 7 or 8, they're starting to move into the Norwegian Red Cross and work together, and now branching out to the smaller villages around.
Because support from different agencies, it is now we are getting relief. It's good, but now the challenge is all the peripheral health institutions are damaged. So how to continue our health services? That is the challenge.
So, and what we can see in the 5 years that separate Haiti from Nepal is a shift in the day when the number of field bed hospitals peak. So in Haiti, we had a peak of number of beds around day 15, whereas in Nepal, we can see a shift and the peak happens around day 4 and day 5, which means timely care for those who need it. So the last stop of our journey is in Central East Asia, a country called Clandestine, which is close to Kazakhstan. Clandestine was hit in August 2017 by a 6.4 earthquake, and the aftershock of the earthquake damaged one of the chemical industries that they have, causing a leak that contaminated a nearby river. Thousands of people have to flee their homes and were in need of shelter, food, and water. To be honest with you, Clandestine does not exist. And the earthquake was never real. Clandestine is actually located in Morges, which is a small town, 40-minute train ride from Geneva, and it was used as a scenario to train United Nations Disaster Assistance Coordinator, the United Nations First Responder Force. These sort of simulation scenarios are very commonly used in the realm of disaster response. They're used to train healthcare professionals that deploy, to train urban search and rescue teams, and to train coordination teams. Sometimes it's just one team, a simulation scenario for just one team. Other times we involve like different countries, medical coordination and search and rescue teams, all in one big event that we can call CMEX, Triplex, or MODEX. The level of reality is amazing. It's fantastic. It provides the perfect opportunity for you to apply what you have learned in class into practice. It also provides you with the opportunity to field test your processes and test your changes and run your PDSAs to see if you can improve or not. I'm aware that the simulation scenarios are not the real thing, but sometimes they feel so real that they can provide a glimpse of how you would react in a real life situation. And then you might decide that deploying to a disaster zone is not for you. You can help by other means, for example, by covering for a friend at the hospital who is deploying. Okay? And we learned some very interesting tips and tricks on how to deal with stress, how to cope with high demand of patients, of meetings, of emails. And one of my favorite is the buddy system. You find a buddy, you find a friend who will watch out for you during deployment, who watch for signs and symptoms of stress, because sometimes you're so embedded and so passionate about the work that you forget about yourself. And that's why the buddy system is so important and it works. Another couple of tips and tricks is try to sleep whenever you can. prioritize, make sure that you can't make peace with the fact that you can't possibly attend every single meeting, answer every single email, or see every single patient. Try to stay fit, try to work out, try to have fun time with your team. Also, try to conduct a hot wash debrief with your team. Once you have finished deployment and prior to boarding the plane back home, just conduct a quick debrief at the lounge of the airport. So you leave everything behind and go back home feeling light and refreshed. And also, once you come home, watch out for signs and symptoms of stress. And I couldn't end this talk without, we've spent the past couple of days talking about people-powered improvement. And I could not end this talk without mentioning the amazing communities that arise in the aftermath of the disaster. And the best way to do it is to mention this book from Rebecca Solnit, where she discusses the gap between beliefs and reality. The image of people behaving in a selfish, savage, panic way has little truth to it. After a disaster, the human nature is resilient, is generous, is brave, and is altruistic. We don't need Gerard Butler. We don't need a handsome hero after all. All we need is resilience.
Blessed days and the dark secret night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Thank you for listening.